How's it going, my friend? It is Danny here from projectmanaverse.com, real world technical project management for beginners. And today I'm going to talk about 3 common mistakes when it comes to stakeholder management. I'll briefly explain what stakeholder management is. I'll explain why it's important you understand these mistakes as a project manager, and then I'll go on to the actual 3 mistakes. So first of all, what is stakeholder management in the context of project management? Well, first of all, let's start with what is a stakeholder. A stakeholder is really anyone that has some kind of interest in your project, and that interest could be very, very high or it could be very low. They could just have a need to just generally understand what's going on, just to be kept informed, or they could be a very important stakeholder where they're either doing something on your project, or they're impacted by your project, or they're a key decision maker on your project. That's what a stakeholder is. And stakeholder management is basically managing the relationship with those stakeholders. So keeping them up to date, keeping them informed, managing their expectations, keeping them in line in some cases. That's basically what stakeholder management comes down to. And as a project manager, that's one of your core responsibilities, which brings me on to why it's important that you understand these common mistakes as a project manager. Because, as I say, stakeholder management is a key responsibility of the project manager. Of course, everyone has to be well behaved on the project and your project team and speak to people correctly. But when it comes down to the actual managing the relationships of the stakeholder and resolving conflicts and all that good stuff, that's really a project manager responsibility. So it pays to understand it and develop the skill of stakeholder management. It's important as well because stakeholders have the power to impact your project in a positive and a negative way. So they can block your project. They can cause problems on your project. They can create noise and damage the reputation of the project and you as well and of your team. But they can also help you and do a lot of good things on your project as well, remove blockers, get things done. So all of that depends greatly on your stakeholder management abilities and skills. So it really pays to understand the common mistakes that people make, that project managers make with stakeholder management, so you can avoid them and get the best possible outcome for your project. Okay, so I've explained what stakeholder management is, and I've said why it's important that you understand these mistakes as a project manager. So let's move on to the good part. What are the common mistakes of stakeholder management? Well, the first common mistake is just not keeping your stakeholders informed of what's going on. So you need to really keep your stakeholders updated, and you can kind of figure out at the start of the project how much you need to update your stakeholders depending on what kind of stakeholder they are, how important they are, how interested they are, and their whole role on the project. So you can get a sense of that, but you can also speak to your stakeholders at the start of the project, and you can ask them how often they want to be updated, what are the key things they want to know. But there are some stakeholders that must be updated in terms of what's going on, and if you don't update them and they find things out late or they find things out the hard way, that can really cause problems. It can ruffle feathers, and it can cause blockages on your project. They can block things, it can cause escalations. So you don't want to not keep your stakeholders informed, especially the senior ones, because that can cause a lot of projects. And it's easily done. Sometimes you can just miss people. There's lots of stakeholders on these projects, and they're wide ranging from engineering to business to risk department. And sometimes you just forget to include people in the updates, but you've got to be careful. So it makes sense to have a sense check when you're sending out important comms, when you're doing important things, to make sure you've had all your stakeholders covered. One good way of doing it is always having a project working group or some kind of status update. If you want to do it with your wider stakeholders to try and include everyone, you should have maybe like a monthly meeting, which is just a general update comms rather than a problem-solving meeting with your core team, but just a general project update call with all the key stakeholders on there. So if they don't come to that meeting and they miss the key updates, it's kind of down to them. But at the same time, you can always send out minutes at the end of the meeting with all the key updates and send that out. So they've really got no excuse in terms of missing the comms as long as you do that. So that's common mistake number 1, is not updating the key stakeholders, keeping them in the loop. Common mistake number 2 is of a similar vein, but it's a bit more important, and that is not including stakeholders in key decisions where they need to be included. This is a really big one because it can have really drastic consequences down the line if you don't include the right stakeholders in those big decisions, and it comes out later on that they weren't involved and they realize it, and that can be, number one, they can just get pissed off and it can cause problems, or number 2, it can actually impact your project in a bad way because you might have built something or designed something incorrectly. You didn't consider that stakeholder who would have had a very important say or thing to say. They might have said, right, you need to think about this because it's what you're doing here is not going to work. The calculation is not right, or you haven't thought about this impact to this area or this downstream system. Whatever it is, if you miss out someone that should be part of a key decision, like signing off a design document or thinking about what goes into testing and what should be tested, or when you can go live with your software, if you miss out miss out an important person in that process, then that can really cause a lot of problems. As I say, not just in terms of upsetting them, but also it could actually impact your project and might stop things or result in reputational damage or extra cost or change requests or God knows what, but it can result in a lot of bad things happening. So make sure you really think about who needs to be involved in these decisions, especially the big ones. That's why we have things like a decision log, and there's really important decisions are made in some kind of steering committee or some kind of governance meeting, and they're documented. But even not the big ones, things like getting involved in some of the design or requirements, those decisions don't always get made at that high level. So you just want to make sure you're really thinking about who your stakeholders are and who needs to be involved. And if you're not sure, just ask them. Say, look, we've got this decision to make. Do you need to be involved in that? Do you need to have a say? And if they say no, then just get that documented so it can't come round and bite you down the line. Okay, the last common mistake with stakeholders is, what was the last one? Is actually not being firm enough is probably the best way to say it. Being too nice, not saying no enough. Now, this is quite easy to do, especially with very senior stakeholders and important customers. We all do it sometimes. You just say yes a bit too much because you want to keep them happy and please them for various reasons. Obviously, the end customers, you want to make sure they're happy because they're the customer you're delivering for. And the very senior people, obviously, you don't want to upset them. You want to look good in front of them. You want to be seen to be doing what they say. But you have to have a bit of courage and boundary sometimes. And before you just blurt out yes, think about what they're requesting and think about, is it actually the right thing to do? Or is it the right direction to take? Is it a reasonable request? Think about that before you open your mouth. And if the answer is no, it's not the right thing to do, or it's not a reasonable request, then you're within your rights to say no. And if you've done your project governance correctly and you've done all your documents correctly and you signed everything off and they've been involved in all the decisions so far, there shouldn't be a reason why you should be afraid to say no. Sometimes it's harder to deal with those senior leaders that just sometimes don't. They're very competent and they know a lot, but they don't always know enough about delivery and how it really works. So they might not be suggesting the right thing. But yeah, you need to have some courage sometimes to push back and say no. And if they keep saying no, if it's a customer, you've got some power to say no and stick to that. They can't really do a lot about it. They can try and escalate, in which case the decision will be made further up the line. But if you're trying to push back to a senior leader, they have the power to override you. If you give them your reasoning and your opinion and they still don't agree, if you want to, you can just, if you feel strongly about it, you can just email them. So you've got the evidence and say, look, you've requested we do this thing. I don't agree, and these are the reasons why, but we'll go ahead because this is what you've requested. Then you've covered your own back in a sense. But yeah, those situations are usually quite rare. But if there's a big one you think is really going to impact your project in a negative way, remember, you are the project manager and you know what's going to work for your project and what's going to impact its chances of a good, successful delivery. And if some senior leader is telling you to do things that are making you go on a tangent or wasting people's times, then you should have the you definitely have the right to say no to that, or at least challenge it and see what comes of it. So that's the last common mistake. It does happen a lot, and it's easily done, and we all do it now and then, but try and avoid that one. Okay, that's the video. I'm going to wrap up there. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. If you want to see more videos like this one, give it a thumbs up. And until tomorrow, please take care. Sorry, don't give it a thumbs up. We'll give it a thumbs up, but subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one. Sorry, I'm on autopilot there. I'll see you tomorrow, and until then, take care.